Thank you, Philippe, for that terrific opening hour. I'm Vanessa Ock. Bienvenidos and welcome to Hour 2 of what has become a defining global event, a movement to inspire action on the worldwide climate crisis, the Climate Reality Project, 24 Hours of Reality. This is our third year, and since the beginning in 2011, millions of people have joined our cause. Tonight, we will be talking with experts about the cost of carbon and how the crisis has affected all 7 continents. For no matter where you live, over the past year, the impacts of climate change have displaced people, disrupted life, and caused entire towns and cities to rethink their infrastructures. You will be seeing people from all walks of life talk about the need to take action. It's going to be an amazing 24 hours, and I'm looking forward to being part of it.
Our climate is changing. Our seas are rising. Extreme weather is disrupting our world. We are already paying the price of carbon pollution, not just in money, but in lives lost and livelihoods vanished, in withering droughts, in populations displaced, and spreading health threats to us and our children. This is the price of inaction. It's time to rise to the challenge of our time. So join us as we engage in a global conversation about the reality of climate change and identify the solutions we must embrace, and together calculate the incalculable, the cost of carbon.
For far too long, far too many people have preferred to talk solely about the problems caused by climate change, rather than focus on the critical second part of the equation, the solution. 24 Hours of Reality is committed to both, raising awareness of the severity of the problem so that all of us can be fully committed to solving it. It's a given that we have always had severe weathers like floods and droughts. Now, those things are happening more often and with never before seen severity. All of these things cost us dearly, which means today we are all paying the price of carbon, the price of inaction on climate change. Let's take a look at the global cost of carbon.
It's like everything you know and love that you just see it get swept away in a matter of hours.
The wind is just shifting continuously.
I've gone through several years like this, but not this long and not this dry.
So this is the cost of carbon pollution. We may not realize it, but climate change is affecting us, all of us, right now. We're seeing it all over the news, from the bottom of the oceans to the tops of the mountains, and in the faces of victims across the globe. How did we get here? Let's start at the beginning. It's 1824, and French physicist Joseph Fourier uses a vase and some cork to figure out that there's an atmosphere trapping heat and making the Earth habitable. Right about this time, we also hit the Industrial Revolution, the birth of large-scale manufacturing and coal power, and the beginning of the carbon boom. 1896 rolls around, and a couple scientists figure out that CO2 from burning all that oil and coal could affect global temperatures. Their numbers based on these fuel consumption rates showed that we had a few thousand years before we had to worry. So we didn't. Then the 1960s came, and things started getting ugly. No, worse. Charles Keeling had captured enough data to determine that carbon levels in the air were directly related to the amount of fossil fuel burned, and that levels were going up. In 2010, NASA declared 2000 to 2009 the warmest decade on record. But hey, what does NASA know?
One small step for man.
Oh yeah, that. And that's sort of the way it's gone. Which brings us to today. Today we live in a world of extreme erratic weather. And here's the kicker. It's costing us big time, right now. In 2013, insurance losses from flooding in Central Europe were estimated at $3.9 billion. In Australia, the 2013 Denali fire alone cost roughly $87 million. And these costs don't just end with the massive damage control bills. The effects ripple through our lives, costing us in other ways. Take Hurricane Sandy, for example. The initial damages cost roughly $65 billion. But what about the small business owners that either lost merchandise, customers, or their entire business because of flooding? And it's not just money. Some of us are paying with lives and livelihood. Others are paying in pain, damage, and suffering. In fact, the climate crisis is recognized as one of the world's leading threats to political stability and national security. The point is, we are all paying today for carbon pollution. Every one of us. We're paying in dollars, in lives, in jobs, in lifestyles, and in every way imaginable. This is not a theory. It's not an opinion. This is the cost of carbon.
This is the cost of carbon, a living documentation of the ways we're all paying for carbon pollution.
A lingering drought in southwest China has caused billions of dollars in losses to agriculture.
Hurricane Sandy also damaged or destroyed more than 650,000 homes.
Bushfires forced hundreds of people to evacuate.
Vast chunks of Mozambique were flooded. 2 million people affected.
The price is too high for any of us. The time for action is now. Find out how you are paying for carbon pollution. Then add your cost. And tell leaders from the top polluting countries, as of today, there will be a political price for denial. Climate change must be taken into account in your leadership. It's time to rise to the challenge of the century. It's time to put a price on carbon. Demand action on climate change now. Add your name to the cost of carbon.
Definitely compelling arguments. Every national scientific organization in the world agrees that climate change is happening across the globe now. In the first segment of 24 Hours of Reality, we saw its impact in North America. Now, let's move our attention to South America and the Caribbean. One major effect of climate change is that it has altered the hydrological cycle of the planet, meaning the predictability and availability of water in all its forms is changing. Glaciers that supply water are retreating. Warmer ocean water can support reef and fish populations, and torrential rains and the floodings and mudslides that result are wiping entire communities off the map. The bottom line, carbon pollution means the water that serves as our lifeblood can no longer be counted on. This problem is especially severe in South America.
Climate change has hit home. Across the globe, our homes, our lives, the things we love, under siege. This is the cost of inaction. This is the cost of carbon.
Eu estava na minha casa, estava vendo TV, eu vi que essa rua estava como se fosse um rio, uma corredeira. Por volta de 1h da manhã, aí veio aquela onda, carregou um cachorro meu, eu não consegui salvar.
Tem pessoas, às vezes, que estavam presas ou não mortas, um galho ou uma pedra muito grande, porque, pelo que eu via, o deslocamento do fluxo fez levantar pedras, paus e tudo. Então, as pessoas do próprio bairro, o que elas começaram a fazer? Tentaram se ajudar mutuamente, tentando resgatar corpos.
A gente vê que com esses desastres naturais, a gente não é nada. O ser humano, ao mesmo tempo, é uma coisa muito frágil.
Foi pesaroso, porque eu encontrei pessoas muito conhecidas falando que a família desceu inteira, pessoas que a gente conhecia muito. Foi desesperador.
One of the things that we have been seeing a lot is coral bleaching. There's places that I used to go to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that you go now and it's all dead.
These corals are listed as critically endangered, and that is literally one step away from extinct in the wild. When they say coral bleaching, it means that the coral gets stressed out and the algae either leave or die. They then look bright white instead of their normal reds or browns that you associate with live coral.
The coral, they were alive and beautiful, but now they are not there again. A lot of them died.
We've been finding temperature change as well. It's a lot warmer at greater depths than it normally was. For instance, we recorded at 110 feet just about a month ago, the temperature was 84 degrees, which is something you don't normally find at that depth.
People have now linked the water temperatures not only to bleaching, but after bleaching occurs disease outbreaks. So between the two, with the bleaching and the terrible disease outbreaks in the Caribbean, climate change is really considered to be the most serious threat for corals and coral reefs. This whole community is reliant on a healthy reef ecosystem for tourism and the fishing industries.
1962, we founded this cooperative. There was an abundance of fish then in those days.
Over the years, when you're doing monitoring, you're documenting decline after decline after decline. Every year, less fish. Every year, smaller sizes of fish. Every year, less live coral.
Everything is being depleted. So I know something is taking place, and you feel the heat that we get now more than before. So you know something is happening. Because the change now is so rapid, you know. Terrible.
Estos glaciares se les llaman achachilas. Nuestros antepasados lo llamaban achachilla porque ellos vivían de esa agua que se derrite, entonces tenían mucho respeto a ellos.
Antes había de esa agua, mi papá me ha contado.
Ya no está como antes. Que me he dado de cuenta que estaba ya un poco bien blanquita. Ahora ya no parece ya como un cerro así nevado.
El cual nos preocupa bastante porque hasta el momento hemos visto que ha desaparecido como un 70% del glaciar, ¿no?
Ahora no hay agua.
El tiempo está cambiando mucho y me doy de cuenta que antes el agua era en abundancia, todo era ya así maravilla, como dice.
El cual a nosotros nos preocupa mucho porque nosotros vivimos en este sector más que todo con el riego que el glaciar nos proporciona, ¿no?
Sí, como ya no hay poca agua y las comunidades que están más arriba nos cortan, ya no nos deja pasar el agua ya.
Mis hijos no quieren vivir sin aquí ya, por falta de agua.
Vivíamos como 60 familias. De los 60 familias, 40 familias ya se han ido a La Paz, a otras ciudades.
Si no hay agua, la niñez realmente para nosotros es muy preocupante. Nos preguntamos nosotros mismos con qué van a vivir ellos, ¿no?
No tiene remedio, yo digo, no, cualquier cosa podemos reponer, pero el Illimani no vamos a poder reponer.
La desaparición del glaciar para nosotros es como una muerte lenta. El agua es vida, ¿no?
Water we've counted on for generations changes before our eyes. We are already paying the price of carbon. The time for action is now.
It's so sad to see how climate change is affecting all our people. Now it's time for our discussion on this our theme, South America, water is our lifeblood. To help us, we're being joined by some of the top experts from around the world on environmental issues. In the studio, Fer Olvera, a founder of the Selva Negra Foundation to promote environmental awareness and the lead singer of the band Maná. Philippe Cousteau, a social entrepreneur, environmental advocate, and the host of our first hour. And via satellite from Bonn, Germany, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Ms. Cristiana Figueres. Bienvenida. I would like to start with you, Ms. Cristiana. You grew up in Costa Rica, where the oceans are an essential part of the social, cultural fabric. What sort of climate change-related impacts have you seen in your country and in the region?
Well, Costa Rica, unfortunately, is no exception to the other tropical countries around the world. Just in the oceans, we have seen the bleaching of which we saw some examples now in other countries. And we have definitely seen the impact on the nesting of the sea turtles that come up to our many beaches to nest and to reproduce. On land, we have just in the past few years had, because of drought, a loss of more than $168 million in agriculture and in cattle ranching. And we have begun to see certain species of trees that have begun to migrate up the mountain from the lowlands, in which is their normal habitat, up the mountains, because the lowlands have become too dry and too warm for them, and they're searching for cooler temperatures. So that is not remarkable, because Costa Rica is very typical of other tropical countries, and I think that's the kind of symptoms that we see in other countries. What is remarkable is what Costa Rica is doing on climate change. Being a very small country, having no historical responsibility for any large part of global emissions, and being a country that is majorly affected negatively by climate change, Costa Rica has taken on the goal of being carbon neutral country by the year 2021, when we will be celebrating our 200th anniversary of independence. That is a remarkable target, and frankly, that is the kind of target that we expect other countries to follow and to achieve.
Definitely, this is an example that we should all follow. I would like to go ahead with you, Philippe. Your work as an explorer and also as an environmental correspondent has taken you all over the world, including South America and the Caribbean. And you have seen firsthand how these countries are suffering with the possibility of losing something so precious as water. What have you seen around the world?
Well, you know, water is that issue that reminds us the human connection to this climate change crisis, and it's the most fundamental, as we saw in the film video, the last statement, water is life, isn't it? And I've seen issues in the Caribbean, all over Latin America, of course, about communities whose livelihoods and lives are being completely destroyed simply because they have no longer access to water. There's already about 1 billion people today who live without an adequate supply and access to fresh water, and as our population climbs, that problem is only going to get worse. And so what we do with water today, all over the world, but in particular places like Latin America, South America, what we do with water is really going to define how we survive as a species going forward over the next 100 years. And the good news is that world leaders like Christina and of course Dr. Kim from the World Bank, who we had in the first hour, are this new generation of visionaries that are coming into office and hopefully sweeping out some of the older generations that are still skeptical of this issue. But water is the absolute single defining crisis that we face, I think, going forward in the 21st century.
And the problem, Philippe, is that many people take it for granted. Mexico is one of the countries that is mainly affected by climate change. You have sea level rise, droughts, you have a little bit of everything, fair. And I know you're doing something unprecedented with your foundation, Selva Negra. You are trying to erase the carbon footprint of your last tour, Drama and Luz. How are you planning to do that?
Well, it's a little hard, a little difficult to calculate, but an environmental scientist in Guadalajara, Mexico, from the ITESO University, he did a calculation with planes, electricity, all the equipment, even the transportation of the fans, and we are around 9,000 tons of CO2, which is a lot. So what we're trying to do is, and we are doing, planting trees. In these years, we got now 100,000 trees, but our target is 500,000 trees. So we're going to do it like 6 years more. And well, that's the way that we're trying to erase our footprint.
This is definitely talking about social responsibility. Wonderful. Ms. Figueres, you preside over global negotiations between countries working to create an international treaty on climate change. In your experience, the concern about water, is it a factor in these negotiations?
Well, certainly, because all of the threats that we have listened to over the past few minutes that have to do with water resources, whether they be ocean water, whether it be fresh water, all of them are actually magnified and amplified by climate change. So they're not caused by climate change, but they're definitely magnified and amplified by climate change. So they are at the root of what the Climate Change Convention and what the negotiations are trying to do, which is on the one hand, support countries to adapt to what are already inevitable conditions that are coming upon them, on the one hand, and on the other hand, help countries to reduce their emissions as fast as possible so that we avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So those are the two tracks that the convention looks at. One is called adaptation, the other one is called mitigation, but they go hand in hand because the longer we wait to reduce the emissions, the more expensive adaptation is going to be. And those are the two things that are at the heart of the negotiations and that all governments of the world are looking at to see how they can support each other to be able to adapt to those inevitable effects, but also come together to some agreement on how they're going to reduce the emissions as quickly as possible. And science already tells us that we must actually peak global emissions this decade, within this decade, and we have to get to carbon neutrality by the second half of this century. That is a major task, but that is exactly the task the governments are working on under the Climate Change Convention.
That's wonderful to hear. Now, a question about legacy, Philippe. You come from a family with great love for oceans and also the commitment to protect them. Are you afraid that maybe your kids or your grandkids won't be able to enjoy the oceans as you did?
Well, already we're seeing this as a big problem. Indeed, I am afraid that they won't. In fact, I know that I am not being able to enjoy the oceans the way that my father and grandfather did. We look at places like the Mediterranean that is fundamentally a dead zone. We look at the Caribbean, which has lost so much of its coral cover already. Today, I visited communities off of Argentina, of Chile, I've been out to the Galapagos Islands, off Ecuador. You know, the issues around the decline in the health of our environment is not something that's down the road. It's happening right now. And I believe that one of the challenges we face when we talk about climate change is we talk about the science. It seems like it's still a very cerebral idea. It's still a very cerebral concept. And we forget that this is about people's lives and livelihoods, and that it's really affecting people today in our health. When we think about the growth in asthma and other diseases that are associated with air pollution, we think about our security, of course, and how that's being affected by mass migrations of people and unrest because of lack of fundamental items like water. Security, health, our economy, they're all suffering today. And that was always something my grandfather taught me growing up. He said, you know, the changes that we're seeing, they're happening already, and it's an opportunity. And I believe he saw it as a positive opportunity for all of us to be able to take action in our own unique ways to make the world a better place, not just for our children or our grandchildren, but for ourselves today and our fellow citizens of the world.
And that's a wonderful message, Philippe, because we can all do something about it. What would be your top environmental priorities?
Well, for Maná, it's very important to keep supporting our environmental foundation, Selva Negra. We were working for around 18 years, working with sea turtles all these years. Around 2 million we released to the ocean, baby turtles. But we're still reforesting in our country, Mexico, and in other countries of the world. But the most important thing that I think we can do as a band is to inspire people to act, to take action. Like you said, we have to take action now, and we have to think globally and act locally in our own communities, our own city. And now it's a great tool, and it's a great news, good news that we can use the social media to do this, and we can change the world. We can really do a green revolution. I got the faith. I'm sure that we can do that now with this great tool, the social media. So we try to inspire the people to do this.
And you definitely do through your music and to everything that you do. A great revolution, that's a good way to put it. Ms. Figueres, you work with with everything that has to do with the Kyoto Protocol, that is the existing international agreement on climate change, and it recommends putting a price on carbon. Could you tell us a little bit about the concept and if it is a possibility?
Well, actually, the Kyoto Protocol does have a price on carbon, and it reaches a price on carbon through various of the financial instruments, and that price of carbon is the price that is actually the valid price in the countries that are participating in the Kyoto Protocol. Moving forward, because not all countries are in the Kyoto Protocol, all countries of the world are working on a global agreement that eventually will end up in a global price of carbon. But you know, I think in order to see why we are doing this, it is not just because we want to put a price on carbon. That is only a means to an end. And I would like to agree with the discussion here. The end that we want is, what kind of a world do we really want? Do we want a world of doom and gloom? No, we don't. Can we avert it? Yes, we can. We are still in time to avert the worst impacts of climate change. We are still in time, if we all make a concerted effort, we're still in time to have a future that we can give to our children that is a future of more jobs, of more energy security, of better health, certainly of better planetary health. And that is the kind of future that we need to be working toward, but we have very short period of time to do it. The IPCC has sounded a voice of alarm. So it is a voice of alarm to get up and to do everything that we can, because we still can have the kind of world that we all dream of.
And definitely, as you say, we really owe it to the next generation, to our kids and to our kids' kids. I would like to ask you, Fer, how can people join what you're doing?
Well, everybody can help. The thing is, we have to understand that the climate change is because our emission of CO2. So, well, we can do, for example, share a car, use the public transportation, use a bike, you know, walk more often. But the most important thing, again, I think it's to join an environmental organization so you can realize what you can do for your own community. And so together, all together, we can change all this. We can fight against the destruction of the jungles, destructions of the forests, the rivers, the oceans, and also we can fight against the corrupt governments that in Latin America we got this big problem, big time. Most of them, they don't care about all these issues. So we need to do a one voice, telling all these people and telling the world we want to change. We want, as I said, a green revolution. Yeah.
And I know you also do it at home with your son, Dali. You teach them all of these things, and it works because, as we see your example with your family, everything that you lived through with your father and your grandfather, now you are the perfect example of somebody that is doing something for the planet because of a heritage, maybe.
Well, we all have to take action. I'll share a story. A few months ago, or about a year ago, my sister Alexandra is an amazing advocate for these issues as well, hosted an event in Washington, D.C. celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. And one of the speakers got up and said, you know, we don't have a scientific problem. We don't have a technological problem. As you can see from these numbers and this information behind us, there's a lot of issues that we know are happening now. What we have is a political problem. And I like to back it up one more step and say, that means we have a constituent problem. Yes. And the great news is that we all have power every single day in the choices that we make, not just what we buy or how we consume food, et cetera, but in who we vote for. And I believe that kind of movement, as Al mentioned earlier in one of his programs, talking about we have to send a message to our politicians that there's a price to pay if we don't take action. And when we think about climate change, we have to remember that inaction is condemning more children to suffer. For example, in the United States, the cost of asthma is $18 billion a year to the national economy. And it's one of the #1 reasons for hospitalizations of children 3 to 7 years old. So that when we don't take action, we're condemning our children to suffer more, we're condemning our economy to continue to suffer, we're condemning ourselves. And there's real suffering of human beings that occurs, and we have to send a message to our politicians that we just won't take it anymore.
The power is in the people, definitely. Ms. Figueres, Costa Rica is one of the greenest countries in the world, and a beautiful country. And I also hear that it's one of the happiest countries in the world. Costa Rica doesn't pollute much, like many countries in South America, but it still faces the terrible reality of climate change. The problem with these developing countries is that they don't have the infrastructure to face these challenges. What can we do at the international level?
Well, the convention is building up a support network for developing countries, and slowly but surely they will all be able to access this. But as Philippe has mentioned, the fact is that no country can afford the luxury of waiting for support from the outside. It truly has to be a bottom-up green revolution, to use that wonderful term, of citizens taking responsibility for themselves, voting for the politicians, not just in the United States, not just in any other country across the world, but in every single country. In every single country, we do have to take that responsibility for voting for those leaders who understand and who are willing to be the visionary leaders. It's not easy to take these decisions because these are long-term decisions. These are not decisions that go with the short-term political cycle. So those leaders that do have that vision need to be supported by the population because those are the leaders that are going to make the policy. So you need both the policies supported by the political will, behind them the public support in the countries, and then you need that to be complemented by the international process that is the top-down process that will harvest all of these efforts and catalyze more action, because it is a fact that every single country needs to do as much as possible, and the sum total of that is still not going to be enough. So we will have to do, as a country, as a collection of countries, everything that we can, each country, and then we will have to explore what we can do more beyond that because we collaborate with each other. Frankly, climate change is the ultimate test of international collaboration because we do have to collaborate in order to be able to address climate change in a time-effective manner.
Definitely. You want to say something, Philippe?
I was just going to say that it also takes a rethinking of our economic system and understanding that when we go to pay for a gallon of gasoline at the pump, we are actually not paying directly for all these other costs that are built into the cost eventually in our tax dollar. So, what we pay at the pump is not the true cost of what it costs us. It comes out of our taxes and down the road, and we just don't see an itemized bill on our taxes every year. But if we did, we'd realize that we're paying these costs today, and that's, I think, a very important message for people to remember, is that you are paying today. This is money that's coming out of your pocket to subsidize the companies that are making a lot of money because they're not having to price the externalities of their product into the cost at the pump or in the cost in your gas bill. And I think that's really important for people to remember. We're paying today already.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Philippe. Thank you so much, Ms. Figueroa.
That is true, but that is true except in Costa Rica, because in Costa Rica we did put a 15% tax on fossil fuels.
Which is leading the way.
We do know what we're paying for. And we took that money and we're putting it into reforestation. So there you go.
And that's the leadership we need.
Absolutely. We need that example to follow. Thank you so much, Ms. Figueroa. Gracias, Fer. Thank you so much, Philippe.
Gracias.
Well, definitely.
No,
I want to thank all our panelists for their time and for sharing this expertise in this critical issue. Your contribution to this program are immeasurable. Today's programs dedicate each hour of the program to the cost of carbon in North America, Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, and South America. But there is another area of the world, not one with a large human population, but where the environmental crisis caused by climate change is growing worse with each passing day: the Earth poles.
What's happening at the Earth's poles might feel far away, but it's already affecting all of us, everywhere. Sea ice is melting. In 2012, Arctic summer sea ice reached a record low in the 30-year satellite record. Why does that matter? First, the poles act as the refrigerator for our planet. Sea ice reflects energy from the sun, drives ocean currents, and generally moderates the climate. As ice disappears, it leads to more heat being absorbed, higher temperatures, more moisture in the air, and more of the costs we've all been seeing due to drought, flood, and other extreme weather. Second, melting ice sheets mean rising sea levels, affecting coastal areas everywhere. Some 40 million people in the world's largest port cities are already at severe risk of coastal flooding. We have seen the changes to landscapes we know in New York, Bangladesh, Florida, Shanghai, and entire island nations in the Pacific. The Earth's poles might be remote from where you live, but the ice they contain, over 90% of the world's ice, is as precious to us as the land we live on.
As promised, tonight is not just to educate, it's also to entertain. So please welcome the legendary Latin rock band with 4 Grammy Awards, 7 Latin Grammy Awards, and 14 Billboard Latin Music Awards. Here is Maná.
Esto es donde jugarán los niños. Cuenta el abuelo que de niño él jugó entre árboles y risas y alcatraces de color. Recuerda un río transparente y sin olor, donde abundaban peces, no sufría ni un dolor, donde diablos jugaran los pobres niños. Ay, 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 en donde jugarán. Se está partiendo el mundo, ya no hay lugar. Tus labios compartidos. Amor mío, si estoy debajo del vaivén de tus piernas, si estoy hundido en un vaivén de caderas, esto es el cielo, es mi cielo. Amor fugado, me tomas, me dejas, me exprimes y me tiras a un lado. Te vas a otros cielos y regresas como los colibríes. Me tienes como un perro a tus pies. Otra vez mi boca insensata vuelve a caer. Compartidos, labios divididos, mi amor. Yo no puedo compartir tus labios, que comparto el engaño y comparto mis días y el dolor. Yo no puedo compartir tus labios. Saludo a Carlos Santana. Esa mujer me está matando, me ha espinado el corazón. Por más que trato de olvidarla, mi alma no da razón. Mi corazón aplastado, dolido y abandonado. A ver, tú sabes. Mi amor, cuánto amor y qué dolor nos quedó. Ay, corazón espinado. Ay, cómo me duele el amor. ¡Épale!
El clima está cambiando.
Tormentas más fuertes.
Inundaciones, sequías, olas de calor.
El uso de energías contaminantes como el petróleo y el carbón
Nos afecta a todos.
La salud de nuestras familias.
Nuestro bienestar.
Y nuestro bolsillo.
Ahora los latinos tenemos el poder de generar cambios y ser parte de la solución.
Alcemos la voz y exijamos límites a la contaminación de carbón
que causa el cambio climático.
Visita sachamama.org y toma acción.
Comprométete.
Juntos por un mejor planeta.
Thank you, Mana. Gracias for that great performance. And also thank you for not just your commitment to the cause we believe in, but for your willingness to take action. Of all the things that we learned over the past 45 or so minutes, the most important thing is this, that the cost of carbon and the devastation that is causing in South America and across the globe is not a theory. It's not a projection. It is hard reality. The question is no longer whether we should act, not it is when we should act, for we know the answer is that all of us must act now. Which brings us to the next segment of our program, which is centered in what we must do and who must bear the price of carbon, those creating the damage. Following the next video, The Way Forward, we will hear from the chairman of the Climate Reality Project, former Vice President Al Gore.
This is home. Home to all 7 billion of us. Home to best friends, first loves, and Oreo cookies. We've had some good times on this rock. We've figured out how to make fire. We've made some great music. Then, of course, there was this. We've also pushed through some tough times together. Now we are faced with another challenge, one so massive and so all-encompassing that it's hard for many of us to even grasp. Earth, our home, is in trouble. Carbon pollution is warming our planet, melting sea ice and creating stronger and more frequent storms, droughts, floods, and wildfires. And we're all paying the price for it in some way. Food and water scarcity, declining health conditions, livelihoods lost, entire systems and infrastructures being stretched to the brink. People, whole communities even, forced off the land they've lived on for generations. And it's happening everywhere. And while we scramble, while we airlift the stranded and heal the sick, while our precious tax dollars are diverted to rebuilding and digging out, while we are paying for these costs, others are profiting. Like the fossil fuel industry. In 2012, 6 of the top 10 companies on Fortune magazine's Global 500 list were oil and gas companies, which combined made $123.2 billion in profit. And there's another few trillion worth of fossil fuel on their books waiting to be burned in the future. And hey, profit is great as long as it's not destroying our planet. And while the carbon pollution that these industries are constantly pumping into our air drastically changes our atmosphere, weather patterns, and ecosystems, these polluters aren't required everywhere to regulate or limit their carbon pollution emissions. They don't have to clean up the pollution they make, and they're not being held responsible for the damages they're creating. They're not paying for it.
Recovery cost is about $32 billion.
The 11 billion euro humanitarian catastrophe.
More roads that are blocked. The house was consumed in flame.
Water's getting scarcer.
Thousands have been evacuated.
Rising sea levels.
Greenhouse gases that are altering the
Life on this planet can become a living hell.
But here's the good news. There is a solution. Polluters must pay the cost of carbon pollution, and they can do it through a number of market-based policies, like a fee that takes into account how much it will cost to manage this mess, or putting a limit on emissions and creating a market for carbon trading. And we have to stop political leaders from giving fossil fuel companies billions in tax breaks and giveaways. And for leaders who deny the reality of climate change, we must use our voices and our votes to exact a political price. When we put a price on carbon, energy companies and utilities will be forced to make their operations cleaner and lower their pollution. As a result, clean energy like renewables will continue to get cheaper and cheaper because the polluters won't be able to give us fire sale prices on carbon, which is actually costing us a bundle in other ways. And that means we'll all be able to make better, smarter choices about the energy we're consuming. And by the way, polluters paying for their mess isn't a new concept. We know that it works because we've done it before. Like back in 1952, when air pollution from the Industrial Revolution created a layer of smog over London so thick that it became impossible to see, the clever folks of Great Britain passed the Clean Air Acts of 1956, making polluters pay through stricter rules. A famous leader once said, "Let us not seek to fix the blame for the past. Let us accept our own responsibility for the future." The time has come to decide for our future.
We are all in this together.
We can do nothing and continue to pay the price as carbon polluters pump endless amounts of CO2 into our atmosphere. Or carbon polluters pay their share, reduce carbon pollution, and give our planet a chance to catch its breath. There is only one way forward. It's time to end the denial and embrace opportunity. It's time to put a price on carbon.
Once we watched a lazy world go by. Now the days seem to fly. Life is brief, but when it's gone, love goes on and on.
Well, we've looked during this hour at water as our lifeblood, and we all learned as kids that the water cycle occurs when there's evaporation off the oceans and it falls as rain or snow, and then it rushes back to the ocean and the streams and rivers. We've looked at this in the context of South America and Central America, and of course we heard about the terrible tragedy at Teresópolis in Brazil a couple of years ago. And even though a lot of people lost their lives and it left an indelible memory, it is one of many events. This was another one this year in Brazil, and all across South America and in Central America, these events have been happening. 21.5 centimeters falling in a very short period of time here in São Paulo. Throughout the last several years, many areas of Brazil and South America have been hit, causing a lot of refugees. This event just a couple of years ago caused 400,000 Brazilians to be homeless as a result of the flooding. The immensely respected former president of Brazil, President Lula da Silva, spoke for many leaders when he noted that it's raining in areas, it's raining too much in areas where it's not known to rain, and we have drought in areas where they don't normally experience drought. Well, this is continuing to happen this year in Argentina. 30 centimeters or 12 inches of rain in just a few hours, the largest downpour they've ever had in that area. A couple of years ago, infrastructure damage in Argentina. This year in Peru, a similar event caused massive damage. In Costa Rica, over the last several years, massive rainfall, all in a short period of time. Mudslides killing a lot of people. Also in Guatemala, the Pan American Highway was severed in El Salvador. In Colombia, just a few years ago, 2 million people were rendered homeless because of a massive series of downpours and the resulting flooding in Colombia. This was an enormously tragic and expensive event. In one of these mudslides, 119 people were killed. We also heard during this hour about the impact of melting glaciers. Nowhere in the world do you have the kind of dependence on glacial meltwater for drinking water and agriculture that you do in the Andes. And the scientists have monitored all of these glaciers throughout the Andes, and you can see what's been happening. All of them have been melting at an incredibly rapid rate. We heard from people in a a rural village in Bolivia, the capital, La Paz, depends upon water from the glaciers on that mountain in the distance. And when the flow increases during the melting, it just is a preview of the drop in supply when the ice is gone. La Paz depends on glaciers for 1/3 of its water. In Peru, 22% of their glaciers have been lost in just the last 30 years. There has been a lot of unrest from people who are concerned about the supply and quality of drinking water. Some of the political leaders have felt such pressure, they actually began to whitewash the rocks in the Andes to try to desperately reflect some of the incoming solar energy and slow down the melting. The way to do it, of course, is to stop putting all the global warming pollution up there. But you see in Peru how the scientists have measured these before and after pictures, the disappearance of the glaciers. And one of the largest in South America, near the southern tip in Argentina, this glacier has disappeared almost entirely over the last many decades. Now, going to the far north end of South America and into the Caribbean, we also heard about coral bleaching. Here is in Jamaica, a precise area where they made the observations, and then 40 years later, the corals are all gone. These corals bleach, as we heard in the scientific presentation this hour, when the algae in their skin is driven away by the excessive heat. They become vulnerable to disease, and repeated events cause the death of the coral. Also true, by the way, in the Florida Keys, where you see a 40-year time lapse in this image. And of course, the water cycle is continuing to cause these destructive droughts, imposing another cost of carbon. This is a dry riverbed in Bahia in Brazil. Over the last several years, we've seen damage to livestock and crops as a result of these repeated deep and severe droughts. This is having a huge impact on farmers. This is a statement from a Peruvian farmer who says the climate changes every year. Some years we have great droughts, and others too much rain or ice. And we have more illnesses with the plants. Just as the corals become more vulnerable to illnesses, the agricultural crops do as well. The riverbeds in some years have been drying up. And of course, when you talk about South America, you cannot fail to discuss the Amazon, one of the great natural wonders of the world. This is a part of the Rio Negro River that helps to form the Amazon. You can see the bridge at Manaus in the background. It almost completely dried up 3 years ago. And that same year, the Amazon lost almost 1 million acres in the historic drought of 2010. It's the second record drought in just 5 years. And we've seen the impact on agricultural income, another cost of carbon. In Colombia, the coffee production down by 1/4. The floods and mudslides, the melting glaciers, the dying coral drought, wildfires, all of these devastating events lead up to a very heavy cost of carbon. And that's why we need to put a price on carbon in the markets and put a price on denial in the political system. Now, luckily, South America, as with many other parts of the world, is moving forward with wind energy and solar energy in Chile and Argentina and all around the continent, Uruguay, in Brazil. This particular park will supply non-carbon energy to 200,000 people. We're seeing a lot of progress also on biomass. In Brazil, for example, where there are plentiful supplies of sun and fresh water, the economics of biomass are much more attractive than they are in many other parts of the world. We're seeing in preparation for the World Cup, the installation of solar panels in sports venues. We're also seeing solar energy in Bolivia, solar cookers in Argentina, even high in the Altiplano and Lake Titicaca in Peru, photovoltaic energy. In Central America, in Costa Rica. And what we're seeing now is a surge in global investment in renewable energy. For the first time in history 3 years ago, the total investments in renewable energy exceeded those in fossil fuels. The shale gas surge has changed that the last couple of years, but now we're seeing a resurgence of this new phenomena. It's taking off. And look at this image here. This is, as of 2013, marked in green, all of the countries where solar electricity is available at equal to or cheaper than the price of electricity from other sources. And now look what happens in the next 6 to 7 years. All of these other countries become areas where the cost of electricity from solar and wind, this measuring solar, is equal to or less than the cost of electricity from coal and oil and other fossil fuels. Now, this is enormously significant because it means that in less than 7 years, more than 85% of all the people in the world will live in areas where the cost of solar electricity is equal to or less than the price of electricity from other sources. That's a big deal. You know, the difference between 32 degrees and 33 degrees, or in Celsius 0 and 1 degree, is more than a difference of 1 degree. It's the difference between ice and water. And when renewable electricity becomes cheaper than the price of electricity from coal, that's a huge difference. And it's why we need to put a price on carbon and put a price on denial in our politics. We have the opportunity and we have the technologies to move forward to save the future of our planet. Put a price on carbon, put a price on denial. And, by the way, stay tuned for the next hour when we'll talk about Europe.
This is the cost of carbon, a living documentation of the ways we're all paying for carbon pollution.
A lingering drought in southwest China has caused billions of dollars in losses to agriculture.
Hurricane Sandy also damaged or destroyed more than 650,000 homes.
Bushfires forced hundreds of people to evacuate.
Vast chunks of Mozambique were flooded, 2 million people affected.
The price is too high for any of us. The time for action is now. Find out how you are paying for carbon pollution. Then add your cost. And tell leaders from the top polluting countries, as of today, there will be a political price for denial. Climate change must be taken into account in your leadership. It's time to rise to the challenge of the century. It's time to put a price on carbon. Demand action on climate change now. Add your name to the cost of carbon.
It was my honor to host the second hour of 24 Hours of Reality, The Cost of Carbon. It's a responsibility I'm happy to accept, and that's because we all have an obligation to honor the stewardship we have for our planet. There is no second chance when it comes to our home. There is no do-over with the idea that the next time we get it right. We owe it to all those who have come before us and to the future generations to get involved now. It's time to take action. It's time to stop living in climate denial. It's time to put a price on carbon. It's time to act together so we can solve the climate crisis. Find out how you are paying the carbon pollution at thecostofcarbon.org. Then add your cost and share it with those who can help end the climate denial and put a price on carbon. And finally, join us in 2014 at the Climate Reality Leadership Corps training and become part of the front line mobilizing for a price on carbon. In this past hour, our theme for South America was water as our lifeblood. Now, here to lead our hour focus on Europe and the theme of infrastructure losses and the architecture of adaptation is Sebastian Copeland.